I come from a long line of crafters. My house is filled with crafted quilts, rugs, pillowcases, and clothing, all wonderful gifts from the crafty women in my life. I have always envied these skills, but never had the patience to sit and learn them.
Instead, I found creative outlets in performance, photography, and drawing, which has led me to a career professionally as a graphic designer. But doing what you love can also lead to creative block, burnout, and screen fatigue, all things I've suffered from. And your 9 to 5 is now your hobbies, which means you don't want to work on personal projects outside of working hours. Basically, I need to learn a new skill, and I have a crazy idea to make a jacket for my upcoming wedding.
My inspiration for this jacket is the nudie suit. My version will be embellished with different symbols and designs that reflect our lives together with our 2 cats and the momentous occasion of getting hitched. The nudie suit was originated by Nudie Cone, the rhinestone cowboy who created stage wear for Western singers and celebrity clients like Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, and Elton John, to name a few. Nudie and his wife Bobby would create beautifully embellished suits for their clientele out of his shop, Nudie's Rodeo Tailors in North Hollywood, California. Nudie's Rodeo Tailors may have closed its doors in 1984, but the nudie suit style has become an iconic Western wear staple and can still be seen in music videos and on the red carpet.
I have always been drawn to the nudie suit and Western wear in general, and I think a wedding is the perfect over-the-top event to wear something like this to. First, I'm going to create a test jacket, meaning it'll be out of cheaper materials than the ones I'll use on my final product. I'm also not going to do embroidery on this jacket, just so I don't get too overwhelmed in the process. Luckily, I've already found a pattern that I really like, although I'm a little bit wary because it does say difficult on it. We'll just see how this goes.
First things first, I took the pattern pieces and cut them out of the main fabric, lining fabric, and interfacing, which is where I hit my first bit of a snag.
I did not get enough interfacing from Joann's. I do have some mid-weight interfacing in my stash from another project, so I'm gonna cut out the pieces from here, and then whatever I can't fit on that, I will cut out of this.
As I said, I went ahead and cut out as many of the pieces as I possibly could with the interfacing I had. I was really hopeful I'd have enough of all the pieces I needed with the bit extra from my stash, but that would have been too easy, right? After the initial bummy feeling of not having enough interfacing wore off, I finished up my day by ironing the interfacing on all of the pieces I had been able to cut out. The next day, I finished up the seemingly never-ending project of all of the interfacing, cutting out the pieces that were missing and then making sure everything was ironed together, all the more frustrating when I continually ironed them or cut the pieces out incorrectly. Multiple times.
I have cut out this piece of interfacing specifically now 3 times. It's still the wrong side. I hate interfacing.
After finally finishing the last piece of interfacing, I finished up my prep work by adding stay tape to the shoulder and collar seams, which turns out I also purchased the incorrect version of this product, but I made the sew-on stay tape over the fusible I was supposed to buy work. Finally, I got to bust out my sewing machine. First up, darting. I sewed the darts on the front and back pieces, then cut them open on the wrong side of the fabric and did my best attempt at ironing them all flat. Then we moved to the front pocket detail. There was a lot of basting involved in this process, which I gotta say, I'm a huge fan of basting now. Overall, the pocket was a bit tricky, but turned out really nice, and I hit no major snags in its creation. Day 4 brought more details, working first on the lapels, which were really daunting, probably because they're the focal point of the jacket, but ended up being one of the easier processes in this project overall, and look how pointy they turned out. Then I moved my attention to the back detail pieces, sewing them all together on the machine and cutting a bit of the excess fabric before I hit another small snag.
Press the lining onto the seam allowance using a point presser. I don't have that. I just wanted to update with that. It's called a point presser, and I don't know what that means. Okay, so I did a little bit of research, and basically the point press would be used so that you get like really sharp, crisp corners and lines on this. And it's basically like a pointy piece of wood. So I don't have a pointy piece of wood per se, but I do have a yardstick. See if the yardstick will save me in this moment.
The yardstick may not have been the right tool, but it really got the job done and slowly became my best friend. Once the back detail pieces were done on their own, I sewed them and the front and back pieces of the jacket together.
I'm wearing a thing I made. Does it look good? No. But I'm wearing a thing I made.
I ended the day by starting the collar, which probably ended up being the hardest part for me to figure out. After a lot of direction reading and rereading, I was able to get all the pieces of the collar sewn together and ironed out correctly, but once I brought in the bodice piece to attach the collar to, I got utterly confused. After multiple attempts, I decided to call it for the night because, well, let me just tell you.
I think I'm gonna stop for today and just figure this out. Tomorrow, maybe fresh eyes. I might do some research, see if I can find a video on attaching collars, or maybe find someone that's made this pattern and done a video in the past. So the phrase of the day is keywords. When I tried on this piece, I made a note that I thought it was weird that we connected the two front-facing pieces. But that's what the pattern said, right? Wrong. This is the back neck facing, so these are the shoulder seams of that. So it wanted me to attach this piece in here and then press the seams flat. It's just my novice showing, and we're gonna seam rip and attach this correctly, and then hopefully the collar will go on smoothly.
I seam ripped the front-facing pieces from one another and sewed the back neck-facing and each front-facing piece together, finalizing this step by pressing the
I'm sorry.
pressing the seams flat and fixing my original error. The rest of day 5 is probably the closest I got to a breaking point on this project, to be fully candid. It started out innocent enough, pinning the collar to the jacket, basting it all, and sewing it together, until I looked closer and realized I missed some spots in my sewing, so I seam ripped out the collar, basted it again, and sewed it again. Still not being fully happy, I did it all one more time, because third time's the charm, right? Finally, I decided to finish up the collar by hand stitching one last little hole and then moving to my couch to hand sew the front and back pieces of the collar to one another to the sounds of reality television. The sleeves were a much anticipated break from the collar fiasco of the last 2 days. I sewed the main fabric sleeve pieces together, then sewed the gatherings to the top of the sleeve caps and gathered it so it would fit in the bodice sleeve holes, which was another first for me. I finished up the main fabric sleeves with a basted hem on each. Through movie magic, I then sewed each of the pieces of the lining as directed and then sewed the lining completely together, which prompted a little dance. Day 7 started with my new favorite standby, basting. I basted the main fabric sleeves in place to the bodice before moving to attaching the lining to the main fabric of the jacket. First, I pinned all the way around the joining sides, then moved to the sewing machine to stitch in place, finishing up my day by machine stitching the seam allowances of the ends of the sleeves and sleeve linings together. Day 8 was all about beefing up those shoulders. I started by testing out the shoulder pad placement. Once I liked the placement, I hand sewed them into place. From there, I hand sewed the sleeve head to the shoulder seam at the sleeve cap. Once the sleeves were finished, I moved to the bottom hem of the jacket, first aligning the main bodice and lining pieces together at the bottom, machine stitching it together, and then using a blind stitch to hem the bottom, leaving just a small hole to flip the entire jacket right side out. My final day on this project was all about buttons. To be honest, I've only ever created a buttonhole one time prior to today, and it was a while ago, so I did some direction reading and decided to do some testing on extra material I had, and boy was I glad I did. It took a few rounds of trial and error until I thought I had a handle on what I was doing. I sewed my first buttonhole on the back detail pieces, and I immediately messed up, having to seam rip the buttonhole back off after my fumble. And of course, it happened not once, but twice. I've said it before and I'll say it again, the third time was the charm, and after that, the second back detail and front buttons went on seamlessly. I cut the holes open and sewed the buttons into place, and I am so proud of my final result.
I am amazed at how well this came out. I had zero expectations, and this blew them out of the park. There are a few things I'll go through with you really quick. First off, I definitely will use thicker material on the outside of the jacket the next time around. It shows every wrinkle, especially when I had to iron on interfacing. I would also not use any midway interfacing. It was kind of just what I had in my stash, but it ended up on the front facing pieces, and I think it added just a tad bit too much structure to it. Third, I would definitely bring in the shoulder just a little bit. My natural shoulder is about here, and I don't mind the bulk, but it's just a little too much bulk for me personally. And obviously, I'd love for the collar to come out cleaner, but that just comes with practice. But otherwise, I am amazed at how this jacket turned out. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I feel so proud of what I've accomplished, and having you along for the ride just makes it that much cooler for me, getting to look back and see how much hard work I put into this. I hope if you've been feeling in a rut, or if there's a hobby that you've been meaning to try and you've just been putting it off, maybe this is that little push to go out there and try it. Getting started is honestly half the battle.